core of what we do. Bart obviously didn't get it, so he had to write it on the board repeatedly. So there are a few things that we're always emphasizing. First is they were here first. And the second is I put up this timeline first day. As Hanford was saying, 11, 12,000 years. Europeans arrived just at the end here, 1855. We emphasize how long the indigenous presence has been and how short the settler presence has been. Even with the treaties, there's 85-year-olds alive today in our communities that when they were babies were on the knee of another 85-year-old who was a baby at the time the treaty was signed. That's how recent. And so studying Native history and geography is not just about racial conflict, diversity, but about the colonization of nations with land, not just about the US government, but about the origin of the country, not just about the policies, but the land base in which they occur and different cultural understandings. So we're always on the first day talking about the difference of the view from the ship, which morphs into the frontier perspective of the edge of settlement going across, and the clash of that with the view from the shore, seeing the ships come in the homeland perspective that, as Hanford was saying, this is the center, this isn't the edge. And we talk about manifest destiny. We're always, as a geographer, I'm always showing maps like this. And these are tools that we can use to really focus attention on the land and colonization. One of the ways we've done it in Olympia, and there's a handout going around, we have a series of walking tours in ArcGIS story maps that actually tell the history of settler colonialism downtown. We have a series of 7 different walking tours. People can walk around. It looks like they're doing Pokemon Go, but they're learning the truth of histories. And we collaborated very closely with the Squaxin Island tribe to tell the story of their forced displacement from downtown as one of the peoples of the set of inlets, and their internment on Squaxin Island after the Treaty of Mississippi, and the actual building of a separation wall along Fourth Avenue during the Puget Sound War that Hanford referenced. So we had this as a very positive example of collaboration with one of the local tribes. So you're going to be hearing a lot about treaty rights and the different treaties today. That's a map I made of the different territories. The fish-ins, the 1974 Boldt Decision. I'm not going to go into that because speakers are going to. And the 1989 Centennial Accord that instituted co-management. That is really unique. And out of the 50 states, we really have it's really a gift to educators that we can show best case scenarios. Collaborative salmon habitat restoration, you're going to hear about that with Jeanette. And when we bring students, and I bring a lot of students right to this room constantly, we have some guidelines for working with Native communities. That's one of the hyperlinks that's in your guide. And we've done collaborations like changing place name, a racist and sexist place name in our college, together with the Squaxin Island tribe, and I'm working now with Elwha on a class called Decolonizing Place Names, which is doing research support for changing the name of the mountain. And our students have done a series of Nisqually watershed podcasts in collaboration with the Nisqually Cultural and Natural Resource Programs. We put out a book on tribal climate resilience called Asserting Native Resilience some years back. And my book is Unlikely Alliances, Native Nations and White Communities Join to Defend Rural Lands, talking about relations between tribes and their rural white neighbors, farmers, ranchers, fishers, who used to be opponents of treaty rights, who come around to the side of the tribes to protect the land and water. And right here is one of the best examples in the whole country, as Hanford was saying, of land back, of a farmer who was kind of hostile to Nisqually, with the landscape over this land. We also have been looking at fossil fuel resistance, and our students set up a website on tribal-led opposition and dam removals. And one of the people we have here is Vanessa Castle from Lower Elwha. Around the whole country and world, they're known as the people pulled out who led the movement to pull out the two dams on the Elwha River. And so our students during the pandemic actually researched this, and we taught them to be illustrators so they could I taught them to make maps. My late colleague, Alex McCarty, taught them to make digital art, and they produced a 132-page book, which is going around and it's available online. That's one of the other hyperlinks. I've also gotten into researching disaster resilience and how that can build alliances between two neighbors that will rely on each other when they're from the rest of the state and move to higher ground. So basically, whether it's watershed restoration, climate resilience, fossil fuel resistance, dam removals, or disaster resilience, Evergreen students can see through their projects in collaboration with tribes that tribal sovereignty protects the health of the land, water, and people for everyone. These place-based narratives draw us away from the doom and gloom discourse in a lot of climate and social conflict studies, offering stories of local, hopeful cooperation. And one of the people that has educated us the most is Hanford, McCloud, who you just met, government liaison for the Nisqually Tribal Council, though he wears lots of hats and makes lots of hats. Hanford grew up in Nisqually and in Yelm, and says that growing up on the Nisqually Reservation was a good learning experience, learning about tribal sovereignty, self-governance, and knowing treaty rights as a hunter, diver, and fisherman. As an artist, he loves to weave the baskets and hats of the Nisqually people that they've made for thousands of years. He's worked in Nisqually all his life, holding different positions and working for some awesome departments. So we introduce you to Hanford.
Thank you, Bill. What do we want to know about? How it started?
A little bit of history.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. I don't have a slideshow, but I do like to talk about history. And growing up here in the reservation, I told you a little bit about the name McCloud, especially in the area here. And over my years of growing up, my grandfather, Don McCloud, all his brothers and siblings, were a big family here, not only here in Nisqually, but there in Puyallup also. And when I talk about that family history, it's sort of like you see a lot of tribes bringing back and the resurgence of this journey of our canoes, because that's how our family in these villages. But when you start paddling in these canoes and getting to these, but you're actually taking your time to get to these village sites that we have, our especially last name McCloud, and then it goes all the way down into Squaw. We're in a tribe because we weren't tribesmen. We were people of a village. We were people of a river. And when you think about that concept, you can notice how when I like Zoltán's presentation, there's another one of a map. It's called the usual and the custom area. That when you think about how we were nomadic and we roamed from the mouth of the river to the base of Mount Rainier. And to the base of Mount Rainier, we didn't cross a threshold of who she was. That's where you get past these John Muir campsites and these places where people walk up and people are getting hurt. And now we got an overflux of people trying to get up to this side of a mountain to look at what? Snow? It all starts down here at the mouth where we take care of it, where you're going to hear from these two individuals about the work that's gone into this trail that leads to the mountain. Literally from this area here, you follow this road, that was our path. And we walked that path for almost 7,000 years before they came in and turned it into a wagon wheel. And when those settlers showed up here in the wagons, that's where they started using our path to get to these areas. And one of the paths when it went through Yelm, and we look at Yelm as a city that's growing. This little town, when my grandfather and my grandmother and his brother Andrew McCloud, they bought property in there in 1955 or 56, and it was a dirt road and a blinking light, and all they had was a mercantile and 2 bars. And in those two bars, you had one over here called Bob's and one over here called Chief's Tavern. So you can imagine what happened at the end of the day on that one, right? Everybody met out on the dirt road and said hi to one another. We didn't shake hands, but we said hi to one another, to make sure. That was some of that teaching growing up in that area there. And then it turned into the fish wars, because then you had commercial fishermen living in these areas along this waterway that they thought was magnificent. And the salmon would never disappear. Look at it, just flowing over on your creeks. You're wasting it. They ain't using it. So then they opened up fishing, right? Mine, when I think about grandpa and uncle and how, especially that war started, they all came from a war. World War II. If it was World War II, they were in the Marines. And when they were signing the treaty on the deck of the Missouri, my grandfather had a general pull up his sleeve and put it next to his. Just like that. That's what he remembers. Fighting the wrong war. And when he came home, there was a treaty. There's a right we have. And that's what, for me, that's what I saw. Especially in Yale. And then Nisqually here wasn't really Nisqually. Because then they took all this land from us after we ceded it, and then kept the right to fish and hunt. But yet, they made sure that we didn't cross that line. That's not your res, that's not your boundary. What boundary? What line? And for a long time, there was this invisible line that they drew on us. Or a wire they put up to keep the hostile Indians away from their prairie on their side. All right, and so when I was in Yale, I went through school, especially my father put me through it. No, we were going through 94 was my year. And then my son went to school there, and I made sure that they went to this public school to get this public education that we all wanted, that we thought we needed over here. And when I went into his 5th grade class, the principal and the counselor had him in the office, and he was struggling with school and struggling with life. Me and his mom just separated, and I knew that's what was going on. But then they made this comment about, well, maybe he'd do better in a public or Indian school. She said native school, Chief Bloodshot, which is up here in the 45, like an hour and 15-minute bus ride for our kids from down here. But some of them did go at a time where, it was nice. The school's big. It was just developing and going. And when I heard that, because me and the mom was in the office, I was turning over a new leaf in my life. So I didn't get all irate and hostile and, flip like they wanted you to. I brought in my drum. That's what I do here. I teach kids how to sing. And then I had the cedar bark, which you see in the back. The gentleman asked me about it. I'll talk about it after lunch, but I started bringing that into the classroom because that's what I knew. And what I knew, what my grandmother taught me, is that we need to teach them because they need to know who we are, because they feel like we no longer exist. So then I went into the school system. His grade was 6, and then ran into a gentleman in the back. He'll talk later, Mr. Price, Jerry Price, and we were working on this STI and this curriculum. And for Hanford, I didn't even know what it was. All I knew is that this is where it started with the history that I wanted them to influence, right? But also bring in that culture, which we were missing, especially the teachers, and I realized that. Because mine started for me at that school in 10th grade. And what happened for Hanford was they wanted me to talk in the speech class. And I'm the class clown of the class anyways, I'm always making snide remarks and being sarcastic in the back over there, and always being asked to leave, and but I was a great basketball player and did other activities where, I like to group people up and we got together, and I still do that stuff, like coordinating events and doing all that. So I went into the 10th grade and she said, talk about something you know. And I pulled out this basket I just made. I was 12 years old, 6th grade. My mom told me how to do it. I kept putting my hands on other people, especially kids. I don't know what was with me. And when she took me out to peel the bark off the tree, that's where I connected to that. And then the culture just flowed like the water. Because now I just knew everything. It's like clicking books now. Well, for me here in this space, and the work, there's people here, you're gonna hear them, right? And I always look at the fact that my grandma's over there, and that's her picture right there on the ground. And she would say, in some sense, we need to offend them. Why? Because they need to know what it feels like to be offended. So if you're offended, I'm sorry, you'll get over it just like we did. And she'd always start stuff off like that, because it always felt like we were proving something to somebody, right? And today, with this work and this collaboration, it's free flowing now. It's information that's been there for a while, and I always say that about the teachers is we know what the door looks like and we know what the phone looks like. All you gotta do is pick it up. We have the same number. It's always been 456-5221. Nisqually's had that number. And when we walk through the door, it's a lot easier to be face to face to have a conversation, to do this kind of thing. But for you to feel that, especially that experience, because I'm not selling you nothing. I'm not selling you my culture. I'm not selling you my tradition. What I'm selling you is that experience that I've grown up doing it all my life. But what I realized at one point, I need to get this out. I need to share this with other people. And that's that power we have, or that energy that we have, that we bring to the table. And it can be negative if you wanted it to be, or it can be positive, helpful. So I'll stop there. And I'm gonna turn it over to these two wonderful individuals, right, with Zoltán. And I'm gonna go cook salmon. That's another part of who I am. My dad's down there right now with my son, so, but I'll make sure they come up and say hi in a minute here, but I gotta.
When we take a coffee break, can we come back and see,
Maybe. Down in this little barn area.
Yeah,
right
all
here,
right.
So it might be before lunch.
Already volunteered.
Yeah,
Who wants to go next?
Thanks, Hanford.
thank you.
Hanford has been doing incredible work with the Northwestern schools. Center, John McCoy, and connecting the tribe to the local school district, so they the story of the people right next to them. And I had an experience in my classroom. Students was talking about her experience at the Northwestern schools. I think it's River Ridge and Longhouse, and heard some people and people came to her school, and now her interest was peaked so much she's taking Native studies. So it's working. I did a effort. Our next speaker is Jeanette, Dorner, Executive Director of the Nisqually Land Company, is the Executive Director. She grew up in South Pierce County on the banks of Muck Creek, a tributary to the Nisqually River. She worked for 11 years as the Salmon Recovery Program Manager with the Nisqually Tribe, coordinating the protection and restoration of salmon habitat in the Nisqually watershed, eventually moving on to work on Puget Sound wide, Central Puget Sound salmon recovery for the last decade. And thank you for guiding all of those awesome field trips for all the students that came here as well.
I'm gonna stand up too. Not that that makes me that much taller, but a little bit. Well, good morning, everyone. I appreciate the invitation to speak to you a little bit today. Just listening to that impact of what you learn in your early school. I think a really formative experience for me, as Zoltán said in my bio, I grew up on the banks of Muck Creek, but there wasn't much in my school also about the true history of this place and the people who had lived here. I love that. I'm gonna try and get that slide for you, like 12,000 years and then, but actually the place that I grew up on, my parents bought property. It happens to be the original land claim of John McCloud, who Hanford was speaking about. So he was someone that worked at the Hudson Bay Company, and he married a Nisqually woman, and where he lived is where I grew up, with prairie around me, native prairie and the camas, and then the creek. But when I was in seventh grade, I had a teacher who suggested to me for, a National History Day that I do my project on the Boldt Decision. And the, National History Day has an emphasis on, doing, original interviews and that kind of thing. And this is the eighties. And I went down and to the Puyallup Reservation and interviewed tribal members that have been involved in the fish wars and, learned about the treaty and all of that. And it was incredible. Oh,
I'm sorry.
there you go. And so that I think was, really formative experience for me and really understanding the context of this place that I was growing up in and the people that had been here for thousands of years and the importance of the natural resources and the salmon. So that's how I ended up doing what I do. Having the privilege of working for the Nisqually tribe for a little over a decade, working on salmon recovery. And then now working for the Nisqually Land Trust, which is a nonprofit that works in the Nisqually River watershed in the traditional homelands of the Nisqually people. So our mission at the Nisqually Land Trust, we were founded back in 1989. And our mission is to protect and steward lands that permanently benefit the water, fish, wildlife, and people of the Nisqually River watershed. And we make sure that we have people in there too, recognizing that history. So just to give you some geography in honor of Zoltán. This is a map of the Nisqually watershed. So Hanford was talking about, it starts up at Mount Rainier, and then it flows about 78 miles down to just below where we are, the mouth of the river. If you click one more time. So the waters are protected, that land is protected by Mount Rainier National Park. And then if you click one more time, and then the mouth of the river is protected in the habitat is being protected in those at the headwaters and at the mouth, but then there's what's going on in between. So if you go ahead and click the next slide. So speaking of the tribe and Billy, who you see up on the screen there. So Billy, who Justin will probably talk about more, but Billy, after he led the fight during the fish wars, and that was successful, in the 80s, one of the things that he was doing was trying to work with people in the Nisqually watershed to bring people together to take care of the river and the salmon. He realized that having reaffirmed the treaty right for tribal members to continue to fish that they had for thousands of years was going to be meaningless if there were no salmon left to fish on. And that a big part of that was taking care of the Nisqually people's homeland and the habitat that was important for maintaining salmon. And so there was a group of people that came together to start talking about how they could work together to take care of the watershed. And Billy was a leader in that group. And somebody came and gave a presentation to that group, like 1988 or something like that, about the concept of a land trust. And this was a thing that existed in other parts of the country where you could form a nonprofit and work to just buy and hold and take care of important lands. And he said to one of his staff that was sitting next to him at that meeting, we got to get one of those. So our founder, George Walter, said, all right, Billy told me I needed to form a land trust, so I'm forming a land trust. So that's how we were created. So, when you look at the history of land trusts in the United States, not so many of them that it has that as an origin story, where it started as in that close relationship with the local tribe. A lot of land trusts were formed to just protect the land, but not in the context of that history, that it wasn't just land separate from people, but it was land that had been stewarded by a certain group of people for thousands of years. So I feel very fortunate that our organization actually has that different origin history, and that's been a part of who we are and how we do our work. And so the tribe has continued to be our oldest and most important partner in the work that we're doing in the watershed. So we focus on, three kind of main areas in the watershed and in South Puget Sound. So the middle area that is the brighter yellow, is the area that salmon use in the Nisqually watershed. And so, we work to buy and protect important habitat lands for salmon in that area. Up in the headwaters part, the forests, up near Mount Rainier, we're working to protect, forests. And then, in the South Puget Sound area, up at the top there, the marine shorelines, we expanded into that area a few years ago because recognizing that Nisqually salmon don't just need good habitat in the freshwater, as those fish are leaving, the juvenile fish are leaving to head out into the open ocean. Having good habitat along the shorelines of Puget Sound is important for their survival as well. So we've been working to buy and protect habitat lands, in the South Puget Sound area as well. Go ahead. So this is a map that shows, we're still working on a map that shows both simultaneously with our marine area, but this is on the freshwater. All the red that you see on this are lands that we currently own and are stewarding, throughout the watershed. With our partners, we've protected a little over 10,000 acres over the last 3 decades. And we currently own about 6,000 of those acres that we're continuing to, steward. There's some that is actually, land that we have transferred after we bought it to the Nisqually tribe, and they directly steward it. And then, you can see up in the Ashford area, there's like a kind of a yellowy orangey section. And that's land that we worked with the Nisqually tribe, and then they bought directly as part of our community forest initiative. And I have a slide on that.
Can we ask a question before we?
Yeah.
The community forest part, it seems like it's a very small, has it always been that size, that community forest part of the?
The community
map?
forest?
Yeah, then it's, well, I'm just curious.
So we just started the community forest initiative in the last, a little over a decade, I think. And, it's actually pretty big.
Okay.
We're working on continuing to buy, we have to buy it a section at a time, and it's a couple $1 million every section to buy it from the commercial forest industry that owns that land. So so it's a pretty big deal every time we buy another section to secure the money and then to be able to buy it.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So just wanted to give you a sense of what the river looks like and some of the areas that we've protected. So from, so we look at, there's the first section of the river that comes from Mount Rainier down to Tacoma Power has a series of 2 dams on the river. We don't believe that they're a fish passage issue. They did have an impact on watershed, river processes downstream, although they have revised how they manage flows in a way that has really improved habitat in the river. But so we look at the part of the river that salmon have historically used and used today is from the dams down to the mouth, and that's about 42 miles. And if you look at both sides, you count both sides of those shoreline miles, and you look at how much of the river is in protected ownership. When we were created back in the late 80s, 3% of that shoreline was in protected ownership. Today, in partnership with the public entities that own and are protecting land along the river, and then the 14 shoreline miles that we've been able to acquire over the last 30 years and protect, we're now up to 78% of the shoreline. So we are really fortunate on the Nisqually that a lot of it is wild and natural, and the goal is to allow it to be that way. Rivers like to move in their floodplains, and you'll see in a lot of rivers in Puget Sound, people don't like rivers moving in their floodplains because it gets in the way of things people want to do. And so what we've done by buying up this land along the channel migration zone and the floodplain of the river, we can let the river do what it does naturally. And as it does that, it's creating really good habitat for salmon. So when you go to these places along the Nisqually, you don't see a lot of development. You don't see artificial hardening of the banks. You see these floodplains with good gravel, good spawning areas, pools, wood in the river, and nice vegetation, forest vegetation along the sides. There's another picture. This is in the Yelm area on some property that we've acquired there. But again, you'll see good forest on both sides, wood in the river. Lots of nice gravel spawning areas. Can you go ahead? I'm doing this pretty quickly because I want to make sure there's some time for Justin too. But community forest, this is a close-up of the community forest up in the Ashford area. So we've been working to acquire forest. It's in between Gifford Pinchot National Forest, which is just on the outer boundary of Mount Rainier National Park in this area. And then on the other side is state forest land, the LB Hills State Forest that's managed by Department of Natural Resources. In between was privately held commercial forestry lands that previous to us purchasing them, the management strategy, they're owned by East Coast insurance companies that have a goal of managing for highest investment value and not really thinking about local communities, local watersheds, ecosystem values, certainly following whatever the latest regulations are. But they're doing a 40-year harvest cycle, clear cutting, and it's really not good for the watershed. The part that we're creating the community forest in is actually just on the other side of the ridge from the main river that you see down at the bottom of the map there. And it's the headwaters of one of the most important salmon tributaries to the Nisqually River. And so even though salmon don't go all the way up to the very top of that, what we're doing with the forest and those headwaters is affecting what's happening downstream. And so we have been working with our partners to change how we manage those forests. We're still actively doing thinning in those forests. We're not doing clear cuts. We're doing thinning to improve the health, to allow it to start developing some more natural forest characteristics, better health, allow it to retain and release moisture more slowly so that there's better flow. So we're experimenting with all of those things and just really trying to improve the habitat. And so you can see the first two purchases were done by the Nisqually Land Trust, and then working with the tribe, they were able to secure a clean water revolving loan fund that they are now using to just directly purchase forest land themselves. And the intent is to work in partnership with the Nisqually Community Forest because they want to see this initiative. We work in such close partnerships, sometimes it confuses people because they don't know where one starts and the other one stops. Okay, go ahead, one more. So this was after the last acquisition that the tribe did of forest land up there. I was invited to go with tribal council and some staff of the tribe when they went up to go see the property that they had just acquired. And it was just an incredible, incredible day just to see the joy on their faces, to see this place and these forests that they now have been able to fully reclaim. And so this is tribal chairman Willie in the middle there, the lighter blue, and then some of his fellow council members, and everything you see behind them there in the valley, that's all part of the Nisqually Community Forest. And it's a really special project, and we are just getting started. There's a lot more to protect up there. So anyway, that was, I'm trying to be super quick because there's not a lot of time, but that gives you a flavor of some of the things that we're doing, and happy to answer more questions when Zoltán's ready to ask questions.
Okay, well, we'll do questions after the.
Yeah.
Justin.
Yeah, it's good, Justin.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, people in Wisconsin, that's when the Nisqually tribe is the lead entity for making the plans for local, state, and federal agencies to follow. It's a total mind blow.
Yeah.
And so this is really the pinnacle of tribe data for state. Our last speaker, and then we'll open up for questions, Justin Parker, Executive Director of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. He joined me Governmental Affairs Policy Advisor and Drug Administrative Services at the tribe Conservation Action, is president of the Salmon Homecoming Alliance and treasurer of the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, APNI, Economic Development Authority.
This slide deck is not necessarily for this group, but I thought there was some point of references, so you'll see this is presenting the graduate program at Evergreen State College. One of the professors there is class or maybe two, since we've actually worked for the governor's salmon office. And so he asked me to, how much voice in here, but you anyway, so that, but there's some relevancy to this PowerPoint, so that'd be useful. This is an hour and a half treaty rights at risk 101, if you will. I've done everything from what I call a 5-minute drive through. The very first time I met with Representative Schreier back in DC, it was not a planned meeting. I was meeting with their staff, and he's like, "Hey, can you come meet my boss?" And we give her a little bit of a rundown on what the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission's about, and we're, with the tribes that belong to the commission. And so anywhere from a 5-minute presentation to 2 hours with the entire staff of state agency called Puget Sound Partnership. So, a big part of what we do at the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission is the educational piece. I'm not an educator, just like Hanford saying he's not an educator, but actually he's more in a space, I would say, like my sister who taught at the school, need-based schools for over 30 years. And now she moved to Peninsula College and teaches McCloud language at the college the last 2 years. So, she's really truly an educator. So I'm an administrator, but I do come from the McCloud tribe. As Hanford said, he's calling this, I wanted to get a time check before, is that something?
We're good. We actually have flexibility.
Okay.
Because we have an afternoon, so we can roll with the time.
All right.
I think we're
I just
fine.
I just want to make sure sometimes I'll get going, I'll get off my beat here and I'll
You have a
start
lot to
rambling
share.
a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot here, but if I need to condense it, I can adapt. So, Hanford's calling this the center of the universe. And so, I always say we're at the beginning of the world. So we're at the beginning of the universe out of McCloud. People said, no, you're at the end of the world. I'm like, no, look at the mile markers. It says mile marker 0. Right? When you hit the red line, and 0 is the beginning, right? So we're at the beginning. So anyway, so I'm out of these panelists, 3 panelists. I'm actually not from the South Sound. So I grew up, born and raised out in Niqually, as Zoltán said, fisherman, and then went to college and ultimately came back and worked for my tribe. So I fished from the time I was 9 years old till I was 23. So I got the experiences as a fisherman, which is unfortunately is one of the toughest occupations you can be in. It's just evidenced yesterday, as he's telling Zoltán this morning, because he was referencing somebody else that passed, and I thought he was talking about our situation yesterday. So we had a halibut boat that went down, and my nephew was on it. Him and the skipper went down. It went down so fast they didn't know they were taking on water because their bilge pump stopped working. And it's 4 a.m, so it's pitch black, and they're off of Tatoosh. Off of McCloud Bay, basically. And my nephew was able to hear the raft pop up out of the water, popping. And so he swam towards that, and he was trying to talk to the skipper, and he ultimately was able to climb in eventually. It took him a while. And then we had the other guy that was with him, the skipper, the one that he was hanging out to an ice chest cooler, and they were talking for quite a while, but he was hard to do anything. They're trying to swim over there, and then it went silent. Unfortunately, now it's turned into search and recovery. My nephew was picked up by the Coast Guard, and I think within like an hour or something, we had 45 minutes. So he's fine, but unfortunately, we did lose a macaw tribal fisherman yesterday. So that's the life we choose. We know can be dangerous. Lost others. One of my good buddies passed away in a diving accident, quarterback in high school. I was a receiver, he's a quarterback. He died in diving accident. Doing what we do, we know it's dangerous. It's unfortunate. But that's our way of life. That's how we were taught. As the Hanford mentioned, alluded to, we have the treaties, and so our 5 treaties here in Western Washington comprise this area right here. So that's the Cascade Mountains out to the coast, and as I mentioned, I'm at the very top. Live here in South Sound now. Wife works for Swatson Island. I work for the Fisheries Commission, but that was my backyard right there, the whole ocean side. So that's how I grew up from the time I was 9 till 23, and so very familiar with that area. Very familiar how rough it can get, how dangerous that way of life is. But again, it's something we reserve in our treaties, and that's hugely important because that's part of, the conversation today. And that's one of the prime, I know today's more about the environmental component, and this panel is about the environmental component, and Jeanette did a good job on all the reasons why, with the land purchase, protecting the shoreline, et cetera. And I'll get to that, but I think it's important to understand who the commission is, who we represent, kind of what we do, et cetera. It all starts with our tribes as sovereign nations, and I won't elaborate too much on this, but we have a unique status in this country as a sovereign nation. With the federal government has that federal trust responsibility to the 574 tribes and Alaska Native villages. The treaties, like I said, there was war treaties that were signed mainly inland, East Coast, et cetera. Ours were different. Ours were peace treaties, and so when our ancestors moved forward with protecting certain things that they wanted, again, we focused on that way of life. The 5 treaties that we have here is Treaty Medicine Creek, which is the smallest part of that. My tribe's a little different. From McCloud, we're one tribe, one treaty, Treaty of Neah Bay. We have Treaty of Olympia, Treaty of Point Elliott, and Treaty of Point Point. Those are the 5 treaties that are part of the commission with its 20-member tribes. And I got to admit, Congressman Kilmer took us on a tour, and to be able to see the actual treaty, you can't touch it. It's a white glove operation, and they come in and turn the page for the National Archives. And my great grandfather, to see his X basically on the first signature was pretty amazing. His name was Cow, and for to see your ancestors, and it's not really as we alluded to. I think Zoltán said a couple generations. If you're 85, 170 years, and that's how far back we're going. 1854 and 1855 actually. And again, this is a lot of what was promised in those treaties, that right, taking fish at all usual custom grounds and stations. As Hanford alluded to about the differences in the broken promises that ultimately led to the fish wars, which is statement used to recognize the tribe's treaty rights. You saw a lot of those confrontations, especially in the South Sound. Cal, Nisqually, but there are other tribes that are also involved in it, and we're still getting arrested as well. So what happened there is now turned into 2 different things for us this year. In January, we just rolled out a book from Professor Charles Wilkinson, who passed away about a year ago. And this is one of Billy's ideas, as Hanford said, I'll hit on Billy, or Jeanette maybe said I'd hit on Billy a little bit. And well, Billy, that was one of his things that he did about 12 years ago. I think it was about 2012. He was talking to Mike, my former executive director himself, and he's saying, we got to get our history. We got to get somebody like Charles to author the book, and that led to the book that he published and released, and it's been gone live in January. So Treaty Justice is the name of it. If you're interested, it would be a good educational tool. Fish Wars, you drop the S, you have Fish War, and that's a documentary that was just picked up by the Seattle International Film Festival, May 11th and 12th, I think it is. So that's a documentary that we hired North 40 Production to produce, direct, whatever, everything that goes into making that. It's not my world, but just give you guidance on it. So we got a lot of educational pieces that are happening. We did some screenings for almost a little over 800 Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife staff to Kuskokwim Intertribal, Kuskokwim River Intertribal Fish and Wildlife Commission up in Alaska, just a couple of weeks ago. And then all of our tribes that want to see that screening before the show. And so I know Evergreen State College is also on that list. I've been contacted by them, by the governor's office, the Indian Affairs, as well as the Puget Sound Partnership. And this is really what this is, we heard a couple times already. USB Washington, otherwise known as the Boldt Decision, was handed down, and that was where Judge Boldt ruled that the tribes are co-manage the resources, and and entitled to 50% of the fish return to Washington waters, harvestable fish. And we got other things that come into play that impact that, so it's not 50 in every watershed. There's trade, there's negotiating. We just wrapped it up, actually. It was the week before last that we called North South and the broader Civic Fishery Management Council. Very tough situation as we're to negotiate with the tribes in the state of Washington, and that 50% now is very, very small compared to when we were getting 2% before the Boldt Decision. It's because the resources aren't there. And so they will continue to have problems. And I just want to lay that little bit of that. There's other sub proceedings like the Boldt Decision on phase 2, which dealt with the environmental aspect of it, as well as the hatchery production, and that hatchery fish are treaty fish. And we have the Hopi Aldridge, which got us to manage salmon river by river. And then another one is the shellfish, otherwise known as the PD decision in '94. And then more recently, in 2017, we had the Culver case, or actually one from Judge Martinez in 2013. And then Supreme Court in 2018. There's a Billy, I'll look too bad, to be honest, but probably end up getting a bridge there. The commissioners. So our role and purpose is we are a support service intertribal organization to our 20-member tribe, including my tribe, McCloud, the Nisqually tribe here, as well as 18 others from that map. And I'm just going to fly through this because I really want to get to the environmental piece. And this educational component is hugely important, like I said. So doing these kind of functions, this was, like I said, prepared that I did prepare this for everything in the state college, etc. And this really kind of gets us into the as salmon continue to decline and other species, steelhead, and we're about to there's a petition to coastal steelheads likely going to be added to the USA list by the end of this year. The Puget Sound Chinook is what was added in 1999, as well as the Straits chum, Lake Rosetta sockeye, and in all three of those cases, for example, when they were listed in 1999, have not shown the improvement that we need, and yet the harvest level continues to decline, and so it's the other factors that we have to deal with, and that ultimately led to this treaty rights at risk. Again, another one of Billy Frank's, brainstorming sessions is we got to take this to the federal government. We need them to take over salmon recovery efforts in the state of Washington, because they're the ones that have the trust responsibility, as I mentioned earlier, to the tribes. And the trend shows no signs of improvement. As I said, we got justification for that. The state of Washington does I think it's an annual report, state of the salmon, and it shows where species are improving, where they're not. If there's improvement, I think there might be improvement on maybe 2 species. But in large part, we're continuing on that downward trend. We have a state of the watersheds report that we put out every 4 to 5 years. And it's really going on something for a resource. It's a 400-page document. You can go to northwesttreatytribes.org and download it basically. And that really gets the indicators. So each tribe has their own chapter. So my GIS, my mapping team, they work with each of our tribes, all the tribes provide that feedback to their chapters. Some have a watershed, some have multiple watersheds, but they weigh in on that, and that's what gets us, and even to the point where Governor Inslee is saying, this is a habitat viable right here, you know, the state of Washington saying that, buying off on that, that's hugely important. And it's really, because we're able to set that benchmark, and you can see as things progress or continue to climb, you know, what direction we're going, and then we get into the reasons why and what we need to do to help improve that, so. Treaty rights at risk, again, it's a coordinated federal leadership line and federal program, trying to get them out of operating in silos, you know, trying to get them to talk to each other. And we've helped forge some of that, largely part with the Council on Environmental Quality. And so they don't have authority over any of the other federal agencies, but they can pull in and coordinate and help communicate with the other federal agencies. So when we go back there, we have a large audience. We usually have one big one, and then a lot of separate breakout meetings with individual agencies that we can do a little one-on-one, for example. And this is a picture of my daughter, which is probably 10, 8. So this was, as Hanford mentioned, canoe journeys. So this is at Squaxin Island. She danced in Squaxin Island. She did some McCloud songs as well. But keeping that culture alive, you know, it's living, breathing culture. Tribes ain't going anywhere. That's one of the things I can't, even though fishing may have salmon fisheries may have tanked up in my usual and custom area. I can't just jump on the Nisqually River and start fishing. I can't go down and just jump out in the Puget Sound. I'm limited to my usual and custom fishing area. So it's a little different where you get a state recreational permit or whatever. Like you can go all over the place, right? You can go to the Columbia River, you can go up to the Nipsac, et cetera. So it's a little different for us in how we exercise those treaty rights. And that last point is hugely important. Salmon recovery begins and ends with good habitat. That's a big focus in how we've grown. Our fisheries management team, department, was kind of the basis when we first were formed after the Boldt Decision in '74. And it started out with 3 technical biologists in that arena. And now, over the past 30 years, we now have a full-blown environmental protection department that's pretty much is about the same size or close to our fisheries. Because as our tribes have brought in the financial wherewithal, resources, built up their capacity, we've been able to adjust and adapt to that and what their needs are. And the biggest need has been moving into the environmental facility. More recently, we hired about a decade ago, we hired a climate scientist, because not all tribes can hire a climate scientist. But the way we work in some instances, and still true to this day, is by economies of scale. So not every tribe can hire a climate scientist. 20 years ago, they couldn't hire a wildlife biologist. Some of them did, but not all of them could. So we're able to do that here at the commission and help our tribes move in the direction they want to. So probably heard over the past 6, 7, 8 years now, the southern resident killer whale, and there's a direct correlation with our salmon resources in SRKW. One of the biggest threats is the marine mammals, the pinnipeds. And so when they're just huddled up and if Willie were here, he would talk about it to no end. What he sees in the swallowing, it's just not at the mouth, but they're working their way upriver. You know, they just sit at a dam and just pick off the salmon, right? And so not only is that impacting our livelihood, but it's also impacting the southern resident killer whale population, because that's a declining resources that they're just plucking away to no end. Collaboration. I know this is a big piece of you know what I wanted to get to is that you know we're willing to partner with federal, state, local governments, NGOs, etc. Academia. We do this Puget Sound down the hill typically every spring. We're going back May 13th, May 13th, and that's we have about 60 people coming back there with us. Western Washington University, Wazoo, UW have participated in the past as well, so we definitely have academia folks, finance folks. But at the end of the day, when what can we do to continue to protect our way of life? And again, they focus on the habitat conditions that we're dealing with, but it's also our population. You know, the state of Washington added, last one when they added 10th district, which was Benny Peck and that's represented from Strickland. When they added that new district, that was the third district in 4 decades and 4 censuses where we added another district. And that's just how much our population, I was surprised the 2020 census didn't end up making us formulate 11th district, but we just fell behind a handful of other states, and so we didn't get across that goal line. But our population back in 1970s was under 3 million. Now we're pushing 8 million. And so all those pressures, all those, as you saw, I think Jeanette had a picture of, mentioned something of bulkheads, and you know, that's a big problem out there. You know, with the Corps of Engineers, you know, you go down Puget Sound, you just take you can't maybe see it from the water as much, but if you're out on the boat, it's just like bulkhead to no end, and then you just wonder why our salmon are in disarray here, why they're continuing to decline. So it's a big thing that we've been working with the Corps of Engineers on, trying to make changes out here. There's unique situations with them. They're all about nationwide permitting, and we're about regional conditioning and trying to impact what we call regional condition 3, trying to help make them change that. But it's I call it the Indian 2-step. We collected taking 1 step forward and we take 2 steps back, and so it's unfortunate, but that's just some of the difficulties that we have in getting the federal agencies to move on some of the habitat conditions. When you're engaging with tribes, do it early and do it often. I always hear that from people that they don't know how to engage tribes. You know, pretty much all of our tribes may not be up to date, but they all have their contact information online. If it's a fisheries environmental issue, you can always reach out to the commission. We can help put you in contact with whatever tribe you're trying to get a hold of and the right people. Decision making. Each tribe's a little different, but they all have a governing body. They all have elected councils. Some of them still have traditional aspect to it as well. Like that weighs into some of that contemporary government structure that we have. I know my family, our tribe, we're still pretty traditional in a lot of ways. We lost a lot of our songs and dances, but not as much as a lot of tribes. Because we still potlatched, we still snuck out, canoed out to Tatoosh Island. We held our ceremonies out there, even though the federal government was trying to erase that. And so we did a little different. And thank God our ancestors had that forthright with that vision to do that. And a lot of times I'll hear, well, I talk to so from the tribes, so that's, they want to go that direction. And I'm like, well, knows that person, an authority to do that. So you got to know who you're talking to, not just an individual. So that's important. And having just the commission present does not formulate engagement with tribes per se. You can help coordinate, help pull them together, get people in the right direction. So I think that's hugely important. And I just kind of want to end it with that. And I know we'll just switch over to questions, but I do want to end with Billy. Always, we want to end with Billy. So as salmon disappears, so do our tribal cultures and treaty rights. We're at a crossroads and we are running out of time. And this man right here is just, he's still missed today. His presence is still felt, but he's still truly missed today as he wasn't even with us a few weeks ago. And I don't know if you all know this, but made a big push, and it's happening. I don't know if Hanford got us out there, but each state is allowed 2 statues and statuary hall back in our nation's capital. Billy Frank's statue will be going back there this year. So anyway, so he wouldn't want that, but the tribes are all on board with that. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you, Justin and Jeanette. And we can open up for questions. I'm going to start with Really related to students. And I know that a lot of students aren't, they remember experiences. I wonder what kind of hands-on learning, whether for tribal students, so they will connect to their land and culture, to help dismantle barriers to tribal sovereignty and treaty rights in their communities and governments. So just kind of what opportunities might there be for educators to turn education into action?
So preview of coming attraction, we have a number of affiliate organizations that all were sort of created out of this watershed group that the tribe was a leader in helping to create, but as members of all the community. And so our role at the land trust is the buying and then stewarding of lands. And then we partner with other organizations who bring in some of those other pieces. So the piece that you're asking about, Zoltán, we partner primarily with the Nisqually River Education Project, who focuses on working with K-12 schools and getting kids out into the watershed and doing activities that they are able to engage in. And Davey's here today, and he's going to speak on the next. So I'll let him talk more about the detail, but that is the way that we then to the best by partnering with these other, or like another thing that we do is we partner with the South Sound Salmon Enhancement Group that specializes in doing major salmon habitat restoration projects, the kinds that need like permits and designs and engineering and heavy equipment to like redo stream channels and that kind of thing. So we don't do that, but we partner with them. We own the land. We for those things. And so same thing with the education project. We also do try to do kind of general community education as well. So not just the K-12, but so we do something called nature walks, where we invite people from the community to come out to our properties and go for a walk with us and one of our partners and learn a little bit about a particular property and some aspect of it. In the past, we've done like bird walks or mushroom walks or different things, but the latest nature walk we just did that I was super excited about is we partnered with Hanford and we invited people to come out to one of our properties and see him actually collect the cedar bark from the tree. And so he actually demonstrated how he does it, and
That was so cool. It's actually on the Facebook, Nisqually Tribe's Facebook page. It's amazing if you go to their page, the photos from that.
well, so he's been doing more of that.
Oh, maybe.
And so that one that's on the Nisqually Tribe's Facebook page was a different group that he
Okay.
worked with at just like a couple days before he did ours.
Okay.
But Hanford's doing a great job of just getting out in the community and really showing people culture, so that people understand that. So we're looking forward to doing more of that kind of thing with Hanford and the tribe. But there's nothing like just being out there on the river, seeing it in person, connecting with it, seeing, you know, the birds, the eagles, the salmon, then people really understand what it is. And so kids bringing students out, I mean, Davey's program has brought hundreds upon hundreds of school kids throughout the watershed out onto our properties, and we coordinate, we work on, okay, we want to do a restoration project here, we want to do tree planting, we design the tree planting, and then he brings all the kids out and they plant all the trees. So it's a great partnership, but that's some of the ways that we kind of get the work done, but we also do it in a way where we can give the community some ownership and also an understanding of what it takes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll speak to that as well. For those of you who don't know me, and this is not touched on as science, and I am Vanessa Castle, I'm a member of the Laurel contract. So to second what she said, we get a lot of people out also on the former Elwha reservoirs and do tree planting and vegetation on the dewatered reservoirs. And then doing group tours and going up into see the Elwha Dam site where a dam previously stood, is super impactful. And unfortunately now the Blind Canyon Dam is quite of a hike, so it's not good for littles. But we do bring a lot of other educators and groups of scientists and even just general public up there and let them know the importance of what has happened there, because there's still this great viewing area. A portion of the dam is still standing, just to remind the process that happened and the history of what had happened on that land. And getting to actually look out and see the deep water reservoirs and then see how fast the revegetation has happened to fill in the valley walls. So it's just like the most impactful thing that I've seen for educators in general.
I guess it kind of depends on the age group, but too, so. As you know, was mentioned, I'm also president of the Salmon Homecoming Alliance, and we have an annual Salmon Homecoming event, at the Seattle waterfront, right next to the aquarium. And so that's geared for fourth and fifth graders, and so that's usually the second or third week of September, depends on how things line up. That's usually a good opportunity because we have educational vendors, and then it turns into a full public day on Saturday. So Friday is geared towards fourth and fifth grade students from tribal schools to state public schools. So it's catered to everybody, really. We have a lot of different agencies, federal, state agencies, county, NGOs that set up their educational booths, and it's really interactive. So there's opportunities like that. You know, we tend, like I said, the big thing of what we do at the commission is an educational piece, and that's where I get heavily involved out of the communications team. You know, we put out quarterly magazines, newsletters, we do an annual report. As I mentioned, and when I was going through that, our state of watersheds report is put out every 4 to 5 years. And that's an educational tool. We host various people that, you know, different Indigenous folks that have come over from Japan, from Australia, you know, just all over the world. And then we usually, what they're looking for, what their focus is, you know, we'll usually start them out at the commission, because you can only do so much, and you don't want to, as is mentioned, you want to get them outside, as Jeanette was talking about. You don't want to be huddled up in a conference table, right? But we usually start out there, kind of prime it a little bit. Not much you can see at the commission. A couple of things tend to focus on is our fish out program. So we can go back there and show them how that operates, and for our hatcheries, and then our pagan trailers, which are we'll be looking at tribal hatcheries. And so, you know, when you're producing roughly 38 million salmon and steelhead a year, you know, that's a lot of fin flipping that you've got to do, because it's required under the appropriations bill each and every year. Thank you, Don Dix, for that. And also there's coated wire tags that get put in the snout for indicator stock, to know where it's the intercepting that happens on fisheries management, whether it be Alaska or Canadian fishers or you know, Columbia River, et cetera, so on and so forth. So you want to know what they can tell you the origin. So that's a good learning thing for them. Those are actually better seen when they're out in the field, when they're deployed. So it all depends on timing. August is a big time for us when we have congressional members that come out. We've done collaborated with states and different tours at the various Elwha posts. You know, you gotta showcase the dam, as Vice Chair Russ Hepper is, you know, was saying, you know, we're no longer damned Indians. So, you know, so that's always a good thing for them to see. But I think another one is, you know, I think Hanford mentioned North Thurston School District, and I'm pulling Bill in on this because he's the State Board of Educational Chair. And they have such a good thing going on with Nisqually and the surrounding school districts, with the Yelm and North Thurston School District. And so we just did a thing about a month ago over there, and that just exploded, right? And so I understand it is a lot of, I was surprised at how many people that were there, parents. I mean, it's not just kids, it's parents and all that kind of stuff. So, and he's also been involved with our, we're trying to do a workforce development that we're collaborating with National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration and Department of Commerce. And so we got a work group that I pulled in all our tribes, educational people like him, It's, you know, obviously started with fishery, but, you know, want to pull that educational piece in. And Chief, Kitsap Academy also, developed the Billy Frank, junior curriculum too, so we do stuff like that, but anyway. Yeah, there's a question over here.
So I hear a lot of North Thurston and other school districts, but you've got quite a few from Olympia, and I know a lot of action projects and things that we can do. How can Olympia?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and the tribal, the Quality Tribe Council has is with the Northern School Board, basically, that we've developed over years. I know we're kind of bleeding into probably what Jared's gonna talk about a little bit, so I won't cover too much, but really we've, at Nisqually, we've been able to use this idea of government relationship and consultation around education. We saw that work because of the Boldt Decision in fisheries management, and how if things are gonna happen around fisheries, the state has to consult with tribes on the issue, right? And so we've kind of taken that mentality for education as co-managers, so that the thought process changed from why isn't the state helping us, Native people in education? Now it becomes, let's go help the state, because the state needs it, right? They need our help from a tribal perspective. And so we've approached on a government basis. So Tribal Council and Northern School Board meet twice annually together, have an agenda and go over some stuff. Like I said, I won't get into too much of it because that's kind of bleeding into what Jared did, but we've been able to kind of use the government consultation piece that was so successful in fisheries, or has been so successful, and just transition that into education. So what can your district do? I would encourage you to go back to your administrators, go back to your people at your district level, and encourage them to engage in this tribe, this government relationship with the local tribe. So I believe Olympia would be Swanson, Nisqually, and Chehalis probably with a footprint of the district, as I would imagine. So that's what I would encourage. It's been a huge success for North Thurston and for the Nisqually tribe as well. I'll end there because I know Jared's going to cover more, and we're bleeding into a break, I think, so. Or not.
Don't so we have time for maybe one or two more questions, and then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So any other questions for our panelists?
Yeah, I'm curious, as an agriculture educator, myself, I'm curious in regards to climate change, the issues that are facing right now. And essentially, like the newest climate assessment that the federal government put out in September. Like Northwest, we're looking at the new ones, drought, wildfires. You know, I think we're at 60% snowpack this year, those kind of things. And I'm not trying to do the gloom. I'm just curious if there are examples of agricultural, you know, partnerships with agriculture and the tribes that are working on kind of climate adaptive practices, but also climate restorative practices, both with salmon and for just general food production.
Well, I think you got a specific model here that happened several decades, a couple decades ago. And I don't know if Jeanette was going on that, but if you're going to hit on this, but Jim Wilcox Farms, right? Him and Billy Frank finally forged a relationship, and that really changed the way the Wilcox Farms does things. Now, is it a little more spendier to make that transition and adapt? Yes, but at the end of the day, it paid off. They had that long-term relationship. Jim actually served on the executive council for the Puget Sound Partnership as well. And so I mentioned Puget Sound Den Hill that we do every spring. Jim, up until he stepped down in the council, had been engaged with us the whole time he's been on that leadership council. And so there's examples like that work, and that same relationship has spilled over to Chairman Frank and with Jim's son as well, J.P. Wilcox in the state legislature. And so, you know, we tend to, you know, our tribes out here is one thing I know is that we're really progressive. We're really on the forefront of things. You know, you have bigger tribes, most certainly, like Cherokee, you know, Navajo Nation, etc. You know, they're bigger, but we're always our tribes tend to be on the forefront of a lot of things nationally. And so it's not just in our state or regional, but it's on a national level. And so we're all, and international level for that matter. You know, so there's, I think there's a lot of different examples that we can use, but that's just one for this area. I know we tend to have a little bit of a more struggle at times when it comes to agriculture practices in my world. And so I know we pressed the envelope and the bills that we were working on was the Lorraine Loomis Act. And really tried taking the shift away from voluntary programs to be more mandatory. To just voluntary, we've known over decades of tried and true tested, it just doesn't work. There's some that want to do like a Jim Wilcox. Most don't, so that's kind of the problems that we run into, and you know, we're, at the end of the day, we're just trying to do what's best for the research.
I think just to add on to what Justin said, and he gave a great example that one of the biggest agriculture things is the Wilcox Farms on the river here in Nisqually, but it's not, it's the other aspect of working lands, the forestry. That's where there's a lot going on right now for us. So talking about the community forest, we are doing a lot of experimentation with our partners and looking at how to increase the resilience of that forest in the face of climate change. So as snowpack is reducing, as there's less moisture available, how do we improve those headwater forests' ability to retain what moisture is left? And there's one of the partner groups we work with is called the Northwest Natural Resources Group. And if you look online, they've got some great YouTube videos about some of the things that they're experimenting with, but they're actually doing real experiments in the Nisqually Community Forest on different levels of thinning and creating little gaps in the forest and then they're measuring the snowpack over the winter and moisture retention to see if we do it at a different density or we create these little gaps, does it retain more snowpack for longer? Does it retain more moisture? And they're actually finding that's the case. When you have a completely closed canopy and the snow doesn't get to the ground, it actually melts off faster than if you have some, and like they actually did a tour right in early October when it was just starting to snow, but you could still kind of get up there and you could visually see on the ground the places where it had been thinned and you could see some snow that was accumulating. And then in the place where it was just a dense tree plantation, because these are not natural forests anymore because they've been managed as tree plantations for many decades. And so we're trying to allow them to become more what they were historically. And so these really dense plantations, there's just no room. There's no light getting down to the floor and there's no snow getting down to the floor, no moisture. And so they're actually helping to figure out, like, what do we want to do long-term in this forest to make it more resilient, to retain more moisture. In the lowlands we are, not everywhere is there already intact forest along the Nisqually. Some of the properties that we've purchased for protection had been cut in the past, and we are working on those where we're doing the tree plantings with Davies groups and others. And we are seeing a shift in the survival of our trees. The window of time in which it's okay for us to plant is shrinking. So it used to be that when we were doing volunteer tree plantings, you could start end of September and go through end of March really and have pretty decent survival. We have now bumped that to sometime in November and trying to be finished by early February. Because if we do anything outside of that window, we see that most of our trees are dying. And so it is changing and we have to adapt. So I guess one other example that I don't have a ton of time to go into, but that is sort of the mix of agriculture and restoration is we have a neat partnership with the Eatonville School District where we have a salmon tributary called Elwha Creek that we've been working on for 2 decades because it was identified as a very high priority salmon tributary. And one of the properties that we bought was a historic farm we work with our partners to restore the floodplain, but the farm buildings were just a little bit up out of the floodplain. We were able to transfer that to the school district, the Edenville School District, and they have an outdoor education program that kids can apply to be a part of called GRITS, where middle schoolers come out for the morning and high schoolers come out in the afternoon, and they do a ton of hands-on. They have a community garden and they're practicing growing different things and they work together. And then they also go out into the restoration area and they look at what's going on there and they do meditation. And there's a lot of social emotional learning that they've incorporated into it as well. It's a super neat program. So,
What's it called? Rich?
it's called GRITS.
Grit.
GRITS, and it stands for something which I can't recite at the moment. But it's based on, for those that are from the Olympia area, it's based, they went and talked with the folks that run Grub and got a lot of good ideas from them before they created GRITS.
Resilience,
Oh,
independent teenagers or something like that.
that actually is close, yeah. I don't think the T is, yeah.
There's a whole series of tribal gardens, one's down the hill around the area.
So I would also add though, there's also other models too that are similar, that they can use, you know, lessons learned. When it comes to agriculture and then those relationships and trying to, you know, forge those relationships and then working with them ultimately on best practices.
Yeah.
The classic example is the forest industry. You know, there's, my dad, he worked for Crown Zeller back for 29 years and he was all, you know, sort of tribal chairman on a couple different occasions and then where he went fishing a little bit more later in life, but you know, but it was the wild west out there when it came to law. It's like trees being dropped everywhere, and then obviously you had the spotted owl that came into play, and that kind of changed things. And well, you know, Billy again is another one that forged those relationships with folks, and that's what he was so good at, you know. And you just don't replace that, you know. And it doesn't mean that our chairs that we've had since Billy aren't solid, you know, Lorraine Loomis, Ed Johnson, but Billy was just, you know, there's a reason why he's got a statue going in the statuary hall, right? But he forged those relationships, he worked on that. And then you would sit down and, you know, you gotta stop arguing about this. That's what changed the implementation of the Boldt Decision with him and the DFW director at the time, Bill Wilkerson, almost a decade after the Boldt Decision. We gotta stop fighting, we gotta co-manage in a thoughtful manner.
Because it's common interests.
Exactly, and there's common interest with agricultural practices and then obviously the impacts that has and tribes will work with, you know, whatever sector, you know, they wanna do that. With what they always have in their back pocket is the nuclear option, and that's to sue. And more often than not, that's in the state of Washington, though, right? And 90, not that anybody's counting, but anyway, you know, there's a reason, and that's a very difficult point for the tribes to get to, because you're putting if it's based on USP Washington, you're putting your treaty rights on the line. And if it was in for Kennedy having to recuse himself, so it ended up being 4-4 on the Culver case. That could have been a bad ending, and so that took a lot of deliberation for the tribe just to get that point of, do we want to take, you know, challenges and how do we want to move on it? So they're very difficult decision, you have to put that treaty right on the line, it doesn't come easy, so, but again, they're always willing to work. And then like the lady from here is asking about the Holy School District, you know, you as well. I mean, I have a good relationship and we generally, in fact, we're trying to set up a meeting right now with Boston Forest Protection Association, executive board, our executives, basically my executive board, their executive director and myself, you know, meet together and have regular meetings. You know, I meet with them on the side. We actually met up here 2 years ago. So, you know, we were trying to, you know, develop and then build off of them too. So
last question, Vanessa.
So I'm just curious if, talking about the wildfires, if there has been any resurgence of the cultural burdens of our forests and our healthy forest down here. I know Chehalis has previously, but I wonder if that's something that the land trust has ever explored with Nisqually, or if those have ever even started to be talked about, those conversations.
Not yet. not yet. I think, so do you want to?
I was just asking about cultural burns, because like that's a lot of the things that tribes and their vulnerability assessment, when we're talking about wildfire in our forests with the crown fires, talking about bringing those things back, because, you know, history in our old growth forests is that fire was here all the time. This isn't something new that fire is coming back. We used to bring fire to the forest on purpose because it preserved our forests. And so I was just curious if the land trust was working with anything with returning our cultural burns in our forests, or because I know Chehalis started doing it in their prairies, which I know the state has done it on the San Juan Islands recently as well, to try to help all of our plants, our native plant and vegetation and the seeds that are in the ground. But I was just curious.
Yeah, I think with our community forest, it's so new, we haven't gotten to the point where we've been ready to have, like, the tribe is still working on the co-management agreement with the community forest. They have stated they have the intent to do that, and we don't have the agreement yet, you know? So it's still really new for us. It's also, because it is, in terms of forestry, it is still a smaller pocket surrounded by commercial forestry. There would be some stuff that we would have to work through in terms of, you know, other neighboring landowners being really nervous if we introduce. I will say that, you know, in terms of the history of the entire watershed, and you mentioned prairies, obviously there's really important historic prairies in the Nisqually watershed. You know, the Nisqually tribe, people of the river, people of the grass country. But the interesting thing is that a lot of the largest remnant prairies in the Nisqually watershed are on Joint Base Lewis and McCloud. And the biggest prairie is in the artillery impact area where they practice blowing up their really big bombs. And so accidentally, the base has continued the practice of burning the prairies because it's one of the last best remaining large prairies because it burns pretty regularly. It's just not really safe to go out there very often.
Yeah, because as the Elwha, we have eyes on the Klamath right now because of our relationship with the Klamath, with the dam removal, and then them going to eclipse us as the largest dam removal project in the United States and North America. But they also did a resurgence of cultural burning. And so that's something we're like paying attention to and watching them manage their own lands that way. And so
Yeah.
it might be something we all start looking at because
that'd be
they've
great.
learned through that process.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just mention really quickly? Before, I want to make sure people know about a couple opportunities. One is, we've been talking about the treaty today. If you haven't heard, the Medicine Creek Treaty, there's a page of it right now that's on display at the Washington State History Museum in Tacoma. It's only through early July. I highly recommend going to see it. It's an incredible opportunity. It's usually stored in National Archives. Dustin was talking about seeing the McCloud Treaty. I'd never seen it in person before. And then they have a great exhibit also adjacent to that about the 50th anniversary of the Boldt Decision. So that's a very unique opportunity that I would encourage you to take advantage of. And then just a plug also on the table on the back, I have a sign-up sheet for the Land Trust email. So if you guys are interested in getting updates on things that are going on and opportunities to get engaged, make sure before the end of today that you sign up on there.
Well, thanks to our panelists, and obviously they're here available to answer any questions during our break. And I also have a handout about some of our Evergreen projects that's in the back with some links. And just want to thank Justin.
Thank you, Zoltán, too, for being a
Oh.
lot.